Thank you, everyone. Welcome back to this third session of today's conference. So this session, we will start with a talk by Professor Froukje van der Zwan. The title of that talk is "At the Limit of the Red Sea: Challenges of Deep Marine Sciences." Of course, Professor Zwan, she is an assistant professor in Earth Science and Engineering here in KAUST.
Yes, thank you. I think we're set. So I will talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we see in deep marine science. And I do this from a user perspective and particularly as a geologist. So some of the things I will talk about will be more universal. Some of the things are quite specific for some of the work that I do. If we talk about the deep sea, actually, we do not know so much often because we know more of the far side of the moon than that we know of the ocean floor. And the reason of that is the blue stuff, what we see there, which is the water, which is covering a lot of the ocean floors and which is giving a lot of challenges that we would not have if we were studying the moon. But the seafloor is very important if we want to study the ocean because it shapes the ocean, it interacts the ocean. And most of what we know of the deep sea is still unknown. Large areas of the deep ocean are not explored at all. I work mostly in the Red Sea, and just to introduce a little bit some of the topics that we work about, we work on geology of the crust, volcanic and hydrothermal processes, also deep sea habitats. And why we do that? The geology of the crust is in the Red Sea still not very well determined. This is just an example of some of the models that has been produced over the last 10, 20 years. I don't go in any details, but you see there are many different colors, many different lines for faults. So there's quite a lot of variation in how people interpreted this. And understanding this is important to understand the evolution of the Red Sea, to understand. Well, I went one too fast. It's important to understand element cycles and also habitats, where can people, animals live, and also hazards in terms of earthquakes or also volcanoes. The volcanic processes, they form the new oceanic crust, they grow the ocean. So that's why we study those. We found some craters which may be related to explosive volcanism. And they also form again habitats and drive hydrothermalism. Hydrothermal processes is something what we have on all oceans, where you have seawater going through the crust and getting heated up. And if you have them venting, focused venting, you can get this black smoker type of features. And they are very important, or this process is very important for crustal cooling, for resources. So a lot of metals can be found there. But it's also a very special habitat where we have chemosynthetic communities living, which may be related to or similar to early life on Earth. And then the last topic is the different habitats. The geology is shaping the seafloor, and the seafloor is where also many, particularly sessile organisms live. They need hard substrates, so they sit on the rocks. So we found a lot of these organisms sitting on the volcanic rocks, and further also the morphology of the environment can form hideouts for fish, for example. They like to sit in caves or in craters or something like that. So that are the topics. So where do we study it? Mostly in the axial trough, that are the dark blue parts here in the Red Sea. And the axial trough is typically more than 1,000 meters depth. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to study. If I would go on land, I would like to study all these processes by observations and by sampling. So this would be my normal way if I go to a land volcano. If you're shallow, maybe you can start diving or do some other fancy things going down. 1,000 meters depth, we can forget this. There's no way you can go down there without robotics. And yeah, or we do have some other options still. So without robotics, we can study the seafloor by observations from either space or the ship. So this is an image from a satellite from the seafloor. You see it's very blurry. If we go to ship observation, ship bathymetry, we already get much higher resolution. So we can definitely see something in the seafloor. We do also have other tools. So there is this backscatter of bathymetry data, which tells us some information about the type of seafloor that we have. We can do seismic, we can do gravity, we can do magnetic. So we do have all sorts of tools to observe the seafloor. However, we always do it from the ship, which means there is 2-3 kilometers to the seafloor. So there's a large distance, so we can only obtain a low resolution. So even this nice image in the top has a resolution of 50 meters. So each pixel is 50 meters. Anything smaller than that, we cannot see in this type of observations. For sampling, we do also have possibilities. We can do dredging, we can do coring, we can do drilling. There are sediment grabs. But in all cases, it's difficult to do target sampling. I cannot say I want to have this rock. I can only say I want to have this volcano. And you never really know what you get because mostly we do not have cameras or something like that. So that's really limiting our sampling and observations of the seafloor. So we are very happy with robotics of the deep ocean because we need those to go to the next frontier, to go into much more detail of understanding the seafloor, and particularly in my case, in the Red Sea. And there are 3 sort of types that we typically use mostly. We have the human occupied vehicles or submarines. Then there are the autonomous underwater vehicles, the AUVs, so often in this torpedo type shape. And then there are the remotely operated vehicles, which are basically the robots on the cable. And for each of those, I will say a little bit about the advantages and mostly about the challenges that I see with each of those things and where we as a user would like to see some developments in these type of vehicles. Before I go in each of the details, just some general challenges that we have in general. So one of our challenges is we are at high depths. So the Red Sea is more than 1,000 meters depth. When we study the rift axis, up to 3,000 meters depth. Other oceans, they go up to 6,000 meters depth or even more, but mostly till 6,000 meters. So that means that everything that's built actually needs to be able to handle this high pressure going down. And then quite specifically for the Red Sea, we have a higher salinity in the Red Sea. So that always means that buoyancy needs to be adapted and we have high deep water temperatures. So instead of the typical 4 degrees in the deep ocean, here in the Red Sea, we have 23 degrees, which is not, the challenge is more that most of the vehicles that are built are made for this 4 degrees. So if you put them then in the Red Sea at 20 degrees, then they get overheated and then there's all sorts of problems. Another special thing on the Red Sea is this occurrence of deep brine pools. They are hot, up to 70 degrees Celsius. They are very salty. And at the moment, we do not really have the capacity to go with high-end equipment into these brine pools because they're usually not too resistant for that. Okay, then coming to the different vehicles. So submarines. Big advantage is the experience. So I've had the chance to go into a submarine, the limiting factor, down to 2 kilometers depth in the Red Sea. And it was an amazing experience. And it was also very useful to understand the relations and the dimensions of what you're actually seeing there, rather than, this is getting a bit annoying. Okay. Then what you would see from a video. So going down is really very useful. Other advantages is that we do not have a cable, so you're relatively free to move. You can do dedicated sampling if you go down with a scientist, and you can actually do what you can see what you want to sample if you have the tools to sample. And you can typically get very good video material. So definitely several advantages of submarines. Some challenges are, there is of course a risk. If you bring down a person down to 1,000, 2,000 meters, if anything goes wrong, you die. There's no way to survive that. So there's always the risk. Then their other issue is that we have this limited availability of submarines. They're not that common, they're quite expensive, and especially for deep submarines, more than 1,000 meters, they're not that common. And then they can usually only have 1 passenger or 2 passengers. So getting a submarine, getting a chance to go into a submarine is not happening that much. Other issue is they're typically very large. So on the picture you see that's the Ivremer submarine. You see some people on there. So it's a huge thing. So you need a big ship, makes it even more expensive. And often submarines are associated with dedicated ships. So it's not something that you can just easily do everywhere. Also makes them a little bit difficult to maneuver sometimes. And then because they are so expensive, many of them are owned by rich individuals. So that means that they're not always made for science. And the submarine that I was in was made to go to 11,000 meters depth. It wasn't made for sampling, so it did have an arm, but the pilot could not maneuver the ROV and sample at the same time. So in the end, we could not sample anything. It also did not have USBL navigation because they didn't think that was needed. So even though we may have submarines, they are not always made for scientific purposes. And then again, a specific thing from the Red Sea, salty Red Sea and the hot Red Sea can limit the submarines. So there are some submarines that were rated to 1,000 meters depth and only could go to 500 because of these conditions. And having been in a submarine here at 2,000 meters depth, I can tell you that after an hour down, it gets very, very hot because again, the submarine is simply not made for this. Then the ROVs. There we have a cable and they're steered from the ship. So big advantage of the ROV is that we do have, you can have multiple pilots, you can have multiple observers, you can rotate pilots, you can rotate scientists. So if you first do something in the water column, then the fish people come. If you come to the seafloor, then the geologists come. So many more people can be involved in the science in an ROV. And even though it's on a cable, you still can move around quite a bit. It typically has multiple sensors, multiple cameras, lights. So we can do quite a lot of things with the ROV. And one of the nicest things is that we do have this live stream, so we can directly say what we want to do. We do not need to wait till we load the data. If we see something in the water column which is of interest, we can react to it and go there. And for me as a geologist, sampling is very important, which we can do with an ROV, and we have different manipulators and tools for that. Challenges with the ROV, it's still attached to a cable. So it's not completely independent, and sometimes we need to wait for the ship, or we need to wait if we want to do something, wait till the ship has stopped, otherwise it would drag us along. And it can also go wrong. So this is an example where something did go wrong and they spent the whole night getting out the cable to get the ROV back on deck, which was quite a mess actually. Another issue, what we often have is at the moment, stronger systems that can do better are also directly getting much larger. So a big ROV, so this is an example from the Kiel ROV, it comes with a large launch and recovery system. If you want to get that to a different ship, you need 8 containers, there's a team with 8 people. And so it's not like you can just put it on any ship, and definitely not on the RV Toeval that we have here, for example. Some ROVs, you can do it with less people, less containers, but then it's integrated in the ship often. So it's always very expensive. And if you want to do more at the moment, the systems are very, very big. Other challenge is that also ROVs are not that common, and many of the systems are a little bit older, so they don't always have the state-of-the-art cameras, lights, or software, or navigation, which is very important also for us. Here we have two examples of navigation. The left ROV is very accurate, 2-3 meters, you know exactly where you are. The right ROV had an accuracy of 50 meters. So our map was 2 meters, 3 meters, but we don't know within 50 meters where on this map we are. So that limits the detailed science, of course. And then another issue with this, particularly the older ROVs, is a lot of the ROVs have been adapted over time. They have been modified. They sometimes they work perfect, but only if they are managed by the people that has done that. So if only the pilots that are really trained on this specific system know how to use it, and if something breaks, it's sometimes only one person that knows how to fix it. They're often very good at it and they're amazing, but if one of those people falls away, then you have a problem. It's also not so easy to integrate new sensors or so into an ROV. So we had cases where we had an ROV and we wanted to add some simple things, and you miss an adapter, or the power is slightly different, or so it's often not simple to just adapt it to the purposes that we have. And then one last major challenge of ROVs is sampling, both of very soft material. So example, bacterial mats. A claw cannot grab something very soft, so it's very difficult to grab that. But also hard rocks. So here we have some attempts of sampling a hard rock from a roll. It's impossible in most cases. If you have two manipulators, it becomes a little bit doable, but with one manipulator, getting a rock that is in place, so not something that you just pick up from the seafloor, is almost impossible. So there's definitely a challenge which we would like to address as geologists. Then coming to our last category, that are the AOVs. So a big advantage of an AOV is that it's autonomous. So it can work without the ship. You can leave it in the water from the ship or even from land sometimes. It does its work, and you can start doing other things, so you make optimum use of your ship time that you have. And we can get very high resolution maps. So this is some AOV data, and in this case we talk about a grid space of meters resolution. And typically we have multiple sensors at the same time, so we can get bathymetry data, side scan data, but also water column data. So the other image is water column turbidity, which tells us something about where hydrothermal plumes are. High resolution is one of the great things of AOVs. So this is the Titanic, and where I earlier said the nice map had 50-meter resolutions. Here you can see individual beams and things of the ship, which is from AOV data. And if we have a good navigation, we can also say very accurate where we are. And with AOVs, it's also now possible to have some communication directly, to get the status of the AOV, to even get some snippets of bathymetry, of side scan data. So you know what it's doing. You can even adapt it a little bit. It's not a live stream, though. It's very limited. So then coming to the challenges and the issues that we have with AOV systems. So an AOV system, if something goes wrong, it's normal reaction response, and also the only thing what would make sense is it comes up to the surface and you need to fix it. So it's not uncommon that you have things in cruise reports like this. It started and it came up again because there was a battery issue, or so it happens often that missions get aborted. Then another issue is battery capacity, and especially in relation to either the size of the AOV or the amount of sensors that you have on. So if you want a long mission with a lot of sensors and at the same time also want a smaller system, that's at the moment still very challenging. Again, for the Red Sea, overheating is a problem because the systems are not made for warmer water. So if you have too many systems close to each other, you can overheat them. And we had cases where some systems were not working because they got overheated. Most of them are relatively fast. So that means that sampling is, or they're this torpedo kind of thing. So they need to keep on moving. So sampling is a bit difficult. And also for photographs, it can be a challenge to do those kind of things. Another challenge is the integration of different sensors. So either if you have new sensors, how do you put them into the system, but also AUVs fly over the sea bottom and photographs you would like to have from 10 meters above the seafloor, but bathymetry map you like to get from 50 meters above the seafloor. And to get those things integrated is very difficult. Navigation, similar as with the ROV, is a challenge because if it's not good, some of the data can simply not be used, because if you don't know where your map is, or you also need to correct for movements in the AUV. And if you cannot do that, then sometimes the data can be very nice, but completely useless. Then some specific challenge for us at the mid-ocean ridges is that mid-ocean ridge is not flat. So a lot of systems are performing very well over the sedimented plains, but if you come in such a terrain, it becomes much more difficult. So here you see the bathymetry, and the lines are the tracks of an AUV, and you see that the distance to the seafloor is not constant, and that is due to limited obstacle avoidance, as well as overreacting bottom following mode. So it sees it goes up and then it goes very quickly up, and it may oversteer. You see there's also some small loop. It thinks it's not making it, makes a loop. So that is affecting the data that we get. We can monitor the AUVs, but it's limited. And if you want to do that, you still need to stay close. So that means that your ship cannot do other things. And that has to do with the communication. At the moment, we still cannot send enough data to the ship to really monitor an AUV completely. And for me, a big disadvantage of an AUV is that it cannot sample. We do sometimes unintentionally when we crash into a wall. Usually they don't like that too much. So we have gotten some samples, but in a normal case, you don't sample with an AUV. And then the last thing is that we do not have really this live stream of the data. We get a little bit of information, but we make a plan, and then we need to hope that it's sort of working, coming out good. And if we see something on the way, we cannot really change it too much. So that are the different tools that we use and their advantages, disadvantages. So I just, to end, made a short list of the things that I think would be nice to have in these kind of systems. First of all, it needs to work. And that may sound very simple and very stupid, but we had very often that people came to us, oh, we can do this and that, and we can just adapt it like this. But if it doesn't work, it's not helping. And we can have an ROV that can do juggling underwater, but if it can't sample, I'd rather take a dredge down than having this ROV. It also needs to go deep. So it needs to work, and it needs to work at depth and not just in the pool or just test it out of sea. If it goes deep, it still needs to be able to handle itself, and especially also for the Red Sea in the environment here. So then some other things, good navigation is important. A modular system which is easily adaptable and also easily usable for different users. So not just by the specialists. Good energy management and light. And something which is for the AUV of importance for us is something that could help with the mission planning. So at the moment, we still have a lot of manual planning. You take the bathymetry and then you make a plan over it. And this cannot really be integrated so far. And for the ROV, some improvements could be made in the sampling. So tools with which you can either sample the really hard stuff or the very soft stuff. Then there's this consideration of equipment versus the size and versus so the size of the equipment versus how many people do you need to have, and what can it do? So can we get much smaller systems which we can take easy out, which can still do the same as the huge systems that we have today? One last consideration is the output. Sometimes we get huge data sets, communication from a ship to land. Internet is still very limited, so we cannot have live streams. And if you then get a huge data set, that's not always very helpful. Or if you get 10 different data sets that are not easily integrated, that is something which also would really help improve our use of the data which is actually coming out of it. Then a last slide. This is more of a dream list than a wish list. So I think this is for the future. For the future, what we would like is the combination between these AUVs and ROVs and a little bit of submarines. So having an autonomous system where we have multiple sensors, tools that can go for many days, but where we still have the live stream, where we can directly communicate it, that we can adapt if we see something different, where we can do sampling, maybe virtual reality options, so that what you would see from a submarine, that you can actually experience that while being on the ship or even being on land. And of course, we would also like to have it suitable for the extreme Red Sea environment. So with that, I guess I take any questions.